The Habsburgs, the name alone whispers tales of unimaginable power, vast empires, and a family line so interconnected it practically redefined royalty. For centuries they shaped the very map of Europe, their influence stretching from the sun-drenched plains of Spain to the cold reaches of Bohemia. But beneath the glittering crowns and grand palaces, this legendary dynasty held a dark secret, a penchant for the dramatic, the extreme, and sometimes the truly unsettling. Some were trailblazers who redefined what it meant to rule. Others pursued obsessions that bordered on the bizarre, and a few plunged entire continents into chaos with their unwavering convictions, prepared to meet the members of Europe's most powerful family, who proved that sometimes the ones closest to the throne are the most utterly mad, undeniably bad, or incredibly dangerous to know. Their stories are a mix of love, betrayal, ambition, and a touch of madness that history can barely believe. Number 7. Maximilian, the first Holy Roman Emperor. Maximilian I was a man who seemed to leap directly out of a medieval romance novel, earning him the nickname the Last Knight. Born in 1459, he inherited the Habsburg domains and a restless spirit that yearned for glory, adventure, and the expansion of his family's power. He was a master of self-promotion long before the age of social media, crafting an image that combined the ideals of chivalry with a shrewd understanding of modern politics and warfare. He was dangerous to know not just for his military prowess, but for his relentless ambition and his strategic brilliance that set the stage for centuries of Habsburg dominance. From a young age, Maximilian was trained in the arts of knighthood. He excelled in jousting, tournaments, hunting expeditions, and all the physical pursuits expected of a medieval prince. Accounts from the time describe him as agile, strong, and exceptionally brave. Yet he was not merely a brute force. He possessed a keen intellect and a thirst for knowledge, absorbing lessons in diplomacy, strategy, and even art. His mind was always at work, calculating the next move, envisioning the next grand project. His first major strategic triumph came through marriage, a hallmark of Habsburg power. In 1477, he wed Mary, Duchess of Burgundy, arguably the richest heiress in Europe. This union was not merely a love match, though contemporary sources suggested genuine affection grew between them. It was a calculated move that brought the vast and wealthy Burgundian territories, including the prosperous Low Countries, under Habsburg control. This sudden acquisition instantly elevated the Habsburgs from powerful regional lords to major European players. France, under King Louis XI, immediately recognized the threat this posed and moved to seize some of Mary's lands. Maximilian, however, was not one to back down. He led his forces into battle, personally fighting alongside his men. At the Battle of Guingate in 1479, Maximilian led his army to a decisive victory against the French, cementing his hold on the Burgundian inheritance and demonstrating his military skill. This early success showed the world that Maximilian was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior king in an age that was rapidly transitioning towards gunpowder and cannons. Sadly, his beloved Mary died in a hunting accident in 1482, leaving Maximilian with two young children, Philip and Margaret. Her death was a profound personal loss, but it also plunged Maximilian into a complex political struggle to retain control of Burgundy, particularly as the powerful Burgundian cities tried to assert their independence. Maximilian had to use a mix of diplomacy, negotiation, and occasional military intervention to keep his hold, often facing rebellions from his own subjects, who resented his control. Despite his financial troubles, Maximilian had a grand vision for his dynasty. He understood the power of alliances, and he continued the Habsburg tradition of strategic marriages. He arranged the marriage of his son, Philip the Handsome, to Joanna of Castile, the heiress to the vast and rich Spanish kingdoms. This single union, known as the double marriage, was arguably the most significant dynastic coup in European history. It meant that his grandson Charles would inherit an empire on which the sun literally never set, uniting the Habsburg lands with Spain and its burgeoning American colonies. This brilliant stroke of diplomacy decoyed Maximilian's foresight and his ability to play the long game, demonstrating a dangerous cunning in the realm of international relations. He was in effect laying the groundwork for the most powerful empire Europe had ever seen, ensuring his family's dominance for generations to come. Maximilian was not just a warrior and a diplomat. He was also a patron of the arts and sciences, a man obsessed with his own legacy. He commissioned an enormous autobiographical project, the Dank, an allegorical poem about his own adventures, and Weisskönig, another work glorifying his life and ancestry. He also oversaw the creation of monumental artistic projects, such as the famous Triumphal Arch, a colossal woodcut print that depicted his ancestry and achievements. These projects, while grand, were incredibly expensive, and Maximilian was perpetually in debt. He often had to borrow vast sums of money from powerful banking families like the Fuggers, sometimes even pledging his future revenues or silver mines as collateral. This constant financial strain meant that he was always seeking new sources of income, often through taxes or by exploiting new territories, making him a challenging ruler for his subjects. While he embraced the chivalric traditions, he also recognized the growing importance of firearms and artillery. He was instrumental in developing and integrating new types of cannons and muskets into his armies, understanding that the future of warfare lay in gunpowder. He also reformed his infantry, creating more disciplined and effective fighting forces. He personally led many campaigns fighting against the Venetians for control of Italian territories and engaging in numerous skirmishes with the French. His ambition sometimes outstripped his resources, and he often found himself in complex, multi-front wars battling rivals across Europe. Perhaps one of his most audacious schemes was his ambition to become pope. After the death of Pope Julius II in 1513, Maximilian seriously considered the possibility of succeeding him, even discussing the idea with his daughter Margaret. While this plan never materialized, it reveals the sheer scale of his self-belief and his boundless ambition. He saw himself not just as a temporal ruler, but as a spiritual leader, blurring the lines between earthly power and divine authority. Such a man with such grand and unconventional aspirations was truly dangerous to the established order. Maximilian spent his life in constant motion, moving between his various territories, leading armies, negotiating treaties, and overseeing his grand artistic projects. He rarely stayed in one place for long, a whirlwind of activity and ambition. He pushed himself relentlessly, driven by a desire to secure the Habsburg legacy and to live up to his self-appointed title of the Last Knight. His final years were still marked by political maneuvering and preparations for future campaigns, even as his health began to fail. He died in 1519, leaving behind an empire vastly expanded by his efforts, a formidable military, and a dynasty poised to dominate Europe for centuries. His constant striving, his strategic brilliance, and his willingness to break with tradition made him a figure who, while captivating, was certainly dangerous to anyone who stood in the way of his or his family's ambitions. Number 6. Ferdinand II, Holy Roman Emperor. Ferdinand II was a man shaped by an unyielding faith, a conviction so deep it became the guiding force of his entire life, and ultimately the catalyst for one of the most destructive conflicts. Born in 1578, he was a Habsburg, a member of a family known for its strong Catholic loyalties, but Ferdinand took that loyalty to an extreme that made him undeniably dangerous. His story is one of zealous belief, uncompromising rule, and the devastating consequences of refusing to bend. Ferdinand's early life was heavily influenced by the Jesuit order, the spearhead of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. He was educated at the Jesuit University in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, where he absorbed the strict doctrines of the Catholic Church and developed an intense personal devotion. He saw it as his divine mission to restore Catholicism to its former glory and to eradicate Protestantism, which he viewed as a heresy threatening the very fabric of Christian society. This unwavering commitment to his faith would define his reign and make him an enemy to anyone who held different beliefs. Upon inheriting the inner Austrian lands of Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola in 1590, Ferdinand immediately set about implementing his vision. He began a ruthless campaign of recatholicization. Protestant churches were shut down, Protestant schools were closed, and Protestant books were publicly burned. Pastors were expelled, and citizens were given a stark choice: convert to Catholicism or leave the territory. Houses were searched, and anyone caught harboring Protestant materials or refusing to attend Catholic services faced severe penalties. This aggressive policy, while successful in transforming his personal domains into strongholds of Catholicism, foreshadowed the uncompromising approach he would later apply on a much grander scale. It made him beloved by the Pope and devout Catholics, but deeply feared and resented by Protestants across the Holy Roman Empire. In 1617, Ferdinand was elected King of Bohemia, a kingdom with a strong Protestant tradition and a history of resistance to Habsburg authority. The Bohemian estates, largely Protestant, had been granted religious freedoms by his predecessor, Emperor Rudolf II, through a document called the Letter of Majesty. Ferdinand, however, had no intention of honoring these concessions. He viewed them as illegitimate and an affront to true faith. His policies in Bohemia became increasingly restrictive, leading to growing alarm among the Protestant nobility. Churches were closed, and local officials who upheld Protestant rights were dismissed. The boiling point was reached on May 23, 1618 in Prague. Angered by the perceived violation of their rights, a group of Protestant nobles confronted Ferdinand's representatives at Hradčany Castle. Following a heated argument, the Protestant nobles seized two imperial governors and their secretary and threw them out of a window into a pile of manure below. This event, known as the Defenestration of Prague, was not merely an act of defiance, it was a direct challenge to Habsburg authority and a symbolic rejection of Ferdinand's uncompromising religious policies. It was the spark that ignited the Bohemian Revolt and subsequently the devastating 30 Years' War. The Bohemian estates deposed Ferdinand as king and elected the Protestant Frederick V of the Palatinate in his place. But Ferdinand, now elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1619, refused to accept this challenge. He saw it as a rebellion not just against his rule, but against God itself. He gathered his forces, supported by the Catholic League in Spain, and moved to crush the revolt. In November 1620, at the Battle of White Mountain, just outside Prague, Ferdinand's imperial forces utterly routed the Bohemian rebels. The victory was decisive and brutal. Protestant leaders were executed, their lands confiscated, and a harsh program of recatholicization was imposed on Bohemia. Thousands of Protestants were exiled, and the kingdom was brought firmly under Habsburg control, becoming a hereditary possession of the family. Flushed with success, Ferdinand believed he was divinely ordained to restore Catholicism throughout the entire Holy Roman Empire. In 1629, he issued the Edict of Restitution, a sweeping decree that aimed to restore all church lands, secularized since 1552, back to Catholic control. It also sought to enforce the principle that only Catholicism and Lutheranism were tolerated religions, effectively outlawing Calvinism and other Protestant sects. This edict was a direct blow to the Protestant princes of the empire, threatening their power, their lands, and their religious freedom. It escalated the conflict from a regional rebellion to a full-blown European war, drawing in new powers like Sweden under King Gustavus Adolphus, and later Catholic France, who, despite their faith, feared the growing power of the Habsburgs. Ferdinand's reign was characterized by continuous warfare, as his uncompromising religious policies fueled one conflict after another. The 30 Years' War devastated Central Europe, leading to widespread famine, disease, and the deaths of millions. Villages were razed, cities were sacked, and entire regions were depopulated, while Ferdinand remained steadfast in his faith. Convinced he was serving God's will, the human cost of his conviction was catastrophic. He never wavered in his belief that he was doing God's work, even as his empire descended into chaos and destruction. He died in 1637, still firm in his religious convictions, but leaving behind an empire ravaged by war and a conflict that would continue for another 11 years. Ferdinand II was not a man driven by personal vice or ambition for its own sake. He was driven by an absolute certainty in his religious mission, a certainty that made him utterly inflexible and blind to the suffering it caused. His unshakable faith, coupled with his immense power as Holy Roman Emperor, made him one of the most dangerous rulers in European history. A man whose convictions ignited a continent-wide inferno. Number 5. Marie Antoinette, Queen of France. Marie Antoinette, born an Archduchess of Austria in 1755, was a dazzling, controversial, and ultimately tragic figure who became entangled in the storm of the French Revolution. As a Habsburg, she was sent to France at a young age to marry the future King Louis XVI, a political alliance designed to strengthen ties between the two great European powers. She was beautiful, charming, and initially beloved, but her perceived extravagance, political naivety, and association with the excesses of the monarchy eventually made her dangerous to the very crown she wore, leading her to the guillotine. From the moment she arrived in France, the young Austrian princess faced immense pressure. Her marriage to Louis Auguste, Dauphin of France, was celebrated with lavish ceremonies, but the union was initially troubled by the young couple's shyness and Louis's personal issues, leading to a delay in the marriage's consummation for several years. This created gossip and whispers, fueling early doubts about the future queen. Once the marriage was finally consummated, and she became queen in 1774, Marie Antoinette found herself at the glittering yet suffocating court of Versailles. She was young, energetic, and loved pleasure, a stark contrast to the rigid etiquette and boredom of court life. She sought escape in fashion, gambling, and elaborate parties. Her harem became famously extravagant. Towering constructions adorned with feathers, ribbons, and even miniature ships. Her dresses were exquisite, and her love for diamonds and jewels was legendary, earning her the nickname Madame Deficit among the common people who struggled with poverty while the court reveled in luxury. She commissioned the Petit Trianon, a private retreat on the grounds of Versailles, where she could escape the formality of the court and indulge in a simpler, idealized version of country life, complete with a model farm where she dressed as a shepherdess. While this seemed innocent to her, it further alienated her from a public increasingly resentful of the monarchy's perceived disregard for their suffering. Marie Antoinette's political involvement, though often limited and ill-informed, also contributed to her downfall. She was accused of meddling in state affairs, particularly by promoting Austrian interests, or by favoring friends for important positions. Her Austrian origins made her an easy target for suspicion, especially as anti-Austrian sentiment simmered in France. The infamous diamond necklace affair of 1785 was a scandal that, though she was largely innocent, cemented her reputation as a frivolous and extravagant queen in the public's mind. A con artist used her name to procure a ridiculously expensive diamond necklace, tarnishing the queen's image even further, and making her seem detached from reality. As the financial crisis in France deepened and calls for reform grew louder, Marie Antoinette became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the old regime. Pamphlets and caricatures depicted her as greedy, immoral, and disconnected from the plight of the common people. The famous, though likely apocryphal, quote, "Let them eat cake," perfectly encapsulated the public's perception of her callous indifference. This public image, whether entirely accurate or not, made her a dangerous target as the revolutionary fervor grew. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Marie Antoinette displayed a surprising resilience. She, initially, resisted any concessions to the revolutionaries, urging her husband to maintain royal authority. She became a central figure of royalist resistance, corresponding with other European monarchs, including her brother, Emperor Leopold II, urging them to intervene and crush the revolution. This secret diplomacy, while understandable from her perspective, was seen as treason by the revolutionaries, and became a damning piece of evidence against her. The royal family was forced from Versailles to Paris in October 1789, By an angry mob, they became virtual prisoners in the Tuileries Palace. In June 1791, Marie Antoinette orchestrated a desperate attempt for the family to escape Paris and rally royalist support. In the provinces, this flight to Varennes was a disaster. The royal family was recognized and apprehended, brought back to Paris in humiliation. This failed escape shattered any remaining trust between the monarchy and the people, and sealed their fate. It confirmed suspicions that the king and queen were enemies of the revolution, actively plotting against the new order. As the revolution grew more radical, the monarchy was abolished, and Louis XVI was tried for treason and executed in January 1793. Marie Antoinette remained imprisoned, facing constant harassment and the heartbreak of being separated from her children. She endured a public trial in October 1793 where she was accused of various crimes, including incest with her son, a false accusation designed to outrage public opinion. Throughout the ordeal, she maintained her dignity and composure, refusing to admit guilt. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette, the former Queen of France, was driven through the streets of Paris in a cart, her hair shorn, to the Place de la Révolution. She ascended the scaffold with courage and was executed by guillotine, becoming a definitive symbol of the downfall of the old regime. Her story is one of a foreign princess thrust into a world of immense privilege, whose actions and perceived character, combined with the explosive political climate, made her an unwitting yet central figure in a revolution that consumed her and reshaped Europe. She was dangerous because her very existence and the system she represented became an intolerable affront to a nation yearning for change. Number 4. Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Charles V was a man whose power stretched across continents, an empire so vast it was said the sun never set on his domains. Born in 1500, he inherited an astonishing collection of territories: the Habsburg lands in Austria, the wealthy Burgundian Netherlands, the crowns of Castile and Aragon, which included Spain, and its rapidly expanding American Empire, and the kingdoms of Naples, Sicily, and Sardinia. His sheer power, his relentless pursuit of a unified Christian empire, and the wars he waged to achieve it made him arguably the most dangerous to know ruler of his age, a force that shaped the destiny of Europe for centuries. From a young age, Charles was groomed for greatness. He grew up in the Netherlands, speaking French and Dutch, and only later learned Spanish. His upbringing instilled in him a strong sense of duty and a deep traditional Catholic faith. In 1516, he became King of Spain, inheriting a kingdom that was just beginning to grasp the scale of its new world riches. Then, in 1519, after a fiercely contested election, he was chosen as Holy Roman Emperor, succeeding his grandfather, Maximilian I. This title brought with it nominal authority over much of Central Europe, though its actual power varied. Charles's reign was a constant struggle to manage his sprawling empire and defend it against powerful rivals. He was a deeply religious man who believed it was his sacred duty to maintain the unity of the Catholic Church and defend Christendom against its enemies. This conviction led him into relentless conflict on multiple fronts. His primary rival was Francis, I of France. For decades, Charles and Francis engaged in a series of wars known as the Italian Wars, battling for control over rich Italian territories, particularly Milan. These conflicts were incredibly expensive and often involved shifting alliances. Charles famously captured Francis I at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, a stunning victory that momentarily crippled France. He then dictated harsh terms, including the cession of Burgundy, though Francis later reneged on these promises. These wars drained resources and lives, keeping Europe in a state of perpetual tension. Even more pressing was the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottomans were a formidable military power, pushing into Eastern Europe and threatening Habsburg lands. In 1529, Suleiman laid siege to Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg monarchy. Charles, though not personally present at the siege, marshaled his resources to defend the city. The Ottomans eventually withdrew, but the threat remained constant. Charles also led naval expeditions against Ottoman strongholds in North Africa, such as the capture of Tunis in 1535, demonstrating his commitment to fighting the Ottoman menace on multiple fronts. But perhaps the most profound challenge to Charles's vision of a unified Christian Europe came from within, the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, sparking a religious revolution that shattered the religious unity of Europe. Charles, as a devout Catholic and Holy Roman Emperor, saw it as his duty to suppress this heresy. In 1521, he summoned Luther to the Diet of Worms, where Luther famously refused to recant his views. Charles declared Luther an outlaw. But the Reformation had gained too much momentum, particularly among powerful German princes who saw it as an opportunity to assert their independence from imperial authority. Charles fought wars against these Protestant princes, culminating in the Schmalkaldic War. He achieved a significant victory at the Battle of Mühlberg in 1547, seemingly crushing the Protestant opposition. However, he was unable to force a lasting religious settlement. The religious divisions proved too deep, and even after his victory he faced renewed resistance. Ultimately, he had to accept the religious peace of Augsburg in 1555, which recognized the right of princes to choose the religion of their territory, a major blow to his vision of a religiously unified empire. This peace effectively acknowledged the permanent religious division of the Holy Roman Empire, a reality Charles had fought against his entire reign. Throughout his reign, Charles was a tireless traveler, constantly moving between his various territories to address problems, lead armies, and meet with his diverse subjects. He rarely stayed in one place for long, embodying the idea of a truly international monarch. This constant movement, combined with the immense pressures of ruling such a vast and challenging empire, took a heavy toll on his health. He suffered from severe gout, which caused him immense pain and eventually crippled him. His long years of warfare and political strife left him exhausted and disillusioned. In a truly unprecedented move for a monarch of his stature, Charles V decided to abdicate his various crowns between 1555 and 1556. He relinquished the Holy Roman Empire to his brother Ferdinand, and the Spanish, Italian, and Burgundian lands to his son, Philip II. He then retired to the monastery of Yuste in western Spain, seeking a life of quiet contemplation. This act of voluntary retirement from the pinnacle of power shocked Europe. He spent his final years in relative seclusion, focusing on religious devotions, collecting quacks, and pursuing intellectual interests, until his death in 1558. Charles V's reign was a period of intense conflict and profound change. He was a ruler of immense power and unwavering conviction, whose attempts to maintain a unified Christian empire in the face of religious schism and foreign aggression led to constant warfare. His relentless ambition, his vast reach, and his willingness to use military force to achieve his goals made him a figure of awe and fear, a truly dangerous-to-know monarch whose decisions echoed through generations. Number 3. Philip II of Spain. Philip II, who ruled Spain from 1556 to 1598, was a monarch unlike any other, known as the Prudent King by his admirers and the Demon of the South by his enemies. He was a figure of stern devotion, meticulous administration, and uncompromising power. Inheriting the vast Spanish Empire from his father Charles V, Philip ruled over an empire so immense it truly spanned the globe. From the Americas to the Philippines, his unyielding religious zeal, his relentless pursuit of power, and his willingness to employ ruthless methods to achieve his aims made him one of the most dangerous and controversial rulers in European history. Philip's early life was marked by a strict upbringing, focused on duty, piety, and the intricacies of governance. Unlike his peripatetic father, Philip preferred to rule from the center, establishing Madrid as his capital and rarely leaving Spain. His most enduring symbol is the El Escorial, a massive complex northwest of Madrid that served as a monastery, palace, royal burial ground, library, and art gallery. This austere, imposing structure perfectly reflected Philip's personality, devout, disciplined, and utterly focused on his duties. He spent hours in his study at El Escorial, poring over documents, making decisions, and managing the intricate details of his vast empire. He was famously known as the Paper King, due to his preference for detailed reports and written instructions, governing through an extensive bureaucracy that reached every corner of his dominions. Philip's deepest conviction was his unshakable commitment to Catholicism. He saw himself as the principal defender of the Catholic Church and the champion of the Counter-Reformation. This religious zeal fueled many of his most significant and dangerous policies. He intensified the Spanish Inquisition, an institution that ruthlessly pursued heresy, leading to the persecution and execution of thousands of Spetitian and Exos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, and Moriscos, Muslims who had converted to Christianity. He believed that religious uniformity was essential for political stability, and he ruthlessly suppressed any perceived deviation from Catholic orthodoxy within Spain. This unwavering dedication to his faith made him an implacable foe of Protestantism across Europe. His foreign policy was equally driven by this religious fervor and a fierce determination to maintain and expand Spanish power. He inherited a rebellion in the Netherlands, where the Protestant-majority northern provinces resisted Spanish rule and its attempts to enforce Catholicism. Philip viewed this as both a political revolt and a religious heresy, and he sent large armies, led by commanders like the Duke of Alba, to crush the rebellion. The resulting 80-year war was brutal, characterized by sieges, massacres, and relentless conflict, costing Spain immense wealth and countless lives. Philip's refusal to compromise on religious issues fueled the Dutch revolt, making it a bloody, protracted struggle for independence. Philip also launched the infamous Spanish Armada against Protestant England in 1588. This massive invasion fleet, the largest ever assembled at the time, was intended to depose Queen Elizabeth I, restore Catholicism in England, and end English support for the Dutch rebels. Philip believed he was fighting a holy war, and he invoked divine assistance for his enterprise. However, the Armada was scattered by storms and harried by the agile English navy, suffering a crushing defeat. This catastrophic loss was a major blow to Spanish prestige and marked a turning point in naval history. Yet Philip remained undeterred in his long-term goals. Beyond these major conflicts, Philip was involved in constant struggles. He fought against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, achieving a significant naval victory at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where a combined Christian fleet, led by his half-brother, Don John of Austria. He also absorbed Portugal and its vast colonial empire in 1580. Further expanding his global reach, his empire grew so large that Spain's resources were stretched to their absolute limit, leading to repeated bankruptcies despite the immense flow of silver and gold from the Americas. Philip's personal life was also marked by tragedy and controversy. He was married 4 times, including to Mary I of England, hoping to unite the 2 crowns and restore Catholicism in England. His relationship with his son and heir, Don Carlos, was notoriously strained. Don Carlos was a difficult, possibly mentally unstable young man who eventually plotted against his father. Philip had him imprisoned, where he died in captivity in 1568 under mysterious circumstances, fueling rumors of patricide that persist to this day. Philip, ever the reserved and secretive ruler, never publicly addressed these rumors, adding to his formidable and sometimes sinister reputation. As he aged, Philip became increasingly frail and afflicted by gout, much like his father. Yet he continued to work tirelessly from El Escorial, meticulously managing his empire. Even as his health deteriorated, he died in 1598, leaving behind an empire that was technically at its peak in terms of territorial reach, but also financially exhausted and embroiled in numerous long-term conflicts. Philip II was a man of immense contradictions, a devout ascetic who wielded unprecedented global power, a meticulous bureaucrat who launched audacious military campaigns, and a ruler whose unyielding convictions made him dangerous to his enemies, terrifying to his subjects, and utterly central to the shaping of early modern Europe. Number 2. Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor. Rudolf II, born in 1552, was a Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor whose reign was a fascinating, often bizarre, blend of intellectual obsession, political neglect, and creeping madness. Unlike his more pragmatic predecessors, Rudolf retreated into a world of esoteric studies, art collecting, and strange experiments, earning him a reputation as an eccentric ruler who was profoundly dangerous to the stability of his vast empire. His story is one of an incredibly learned and artistic mind slowly succumbing to melancholia and paranoia, allowing a complex empire to unravel around him. Rudolf spent a significant portion of his youth at the Spanish court of his uncle, Philip II, absorbing the strict Catholic piety and the somber atmosphere. However, upon his return to Vienna, and later his ascension as emperor in 1576, Rudolf chose a very different path from his austere Spanish relatives. He moved his court to Prague, a city he preferred, and there he began to build his own unique world, largely separate from the political realities of his empire. His greatest passion was collecting. Rudolf was one of the most significant art patrons and collectors in European history. He amassed an astonishing collection of paintings, sculptures, precious stones, scientific instruments, and natural wonders in his famous Kunstkammer, or Cabinet of Curiosities. He acquired masterpieces by artists like Dürer and Bruegel, along with exotic animals like lions and tigers, and even a live dodo bird. His pursuit of knowledge was broad, encompassing astronomy, botany, and mechanics. He employed famous astronomers like Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler, and his court became a center of scientific inquiry. However, Rudolf's intellectual pursuits veered into the mystical and the occult. He was deeply fascinated by alchemy, the search for the philosopher's stone that could turn base metals into gold and grant eternal life. He spent enormous sums of money employing alchemists, charlatans, and genuine scholars who promised to unlock ancient secrets. He also delved into astrology, believing that the stars held the key to understanding destiny, and often consulted astrologers before making any decisions, or more often, before postponing them. He became obsessed with mysterious manuscripts, like the Voynich manuscript, a book written in an unknown script which he purchased believing it contained hidden wisdom. These interests, while perhaps understandable in an age transitioning from magic to science, increasingly consumed his attention to the detriment of his imperial duties. As his reign progressed, Rudolf became increasingly reclusive and withdrawn. He avoided public appearances, neglected state affairs, and rarely held court. Petitions went unanswered, and important decisions were endlessly delayed. Foreign ambassadors struggled to gain an audience with him, often waiting for months, sometimes years, to present their credentials. This neglect of governance began to destabilize the Holy Roman Empire, which was already facing mounting tensions between its Catholic and Protestant states. His melancholic disposition, possibly depression, deepened, and he became prone to fits of rage and suspicion, fueling rumors of mental instability. He was particularly paranoid about plots against him, retreating further into the confines of Prague Castle. Rudolf also refused to marry. Despite constant pressure from his family and the various estates to secure the succession, he had several illegitimate children, but never acknowledged a legitimate heir, creating uncertainty about the future of the Habsburg dynasty. This refusal further isolated him and created a power vacuum that his ambitious brothers and cousins eagerly sought to fill. The political consequences of Rudolf's reclusiveness and erratic behavior became severe. The religious tensions within the Holy Roman Empire escalated unchecked. In 1609, to appease the Protestant estates of Bohemia, Rudolf reluctantly issued the Letter of Majesty, granting them extensive religious freedoms. This concession, however, was later revoked by his successor, Ferdinand II, directly contributing to the outbreak of the 30 Years' War. Rudolph's family, particularly his younger brother Archduke Matthias, grew increasingly frustrated with his inability to rule. In 1606, his relatives secretly declared him incapable of governing. A few years later, Matthias formed an alliance with the Hungarian and Moravian estates and led an army against Rudolph. Rudolph, isolated and without significant support, was forced to cede Hungary, Austria, and Moravia to Matthias. In 1608, he tried to retain Bohemia and the imperial title, but was eventually stripped of even those in 1611, leaving him only with the pension and the use of Prague Castle. Matthias was then crowned king of Bohemia and later elected emperor. Rudolph died in 1612, a broken and lonely man, a year after his effective dethronement. His final years were spent largely in isolation. Surrounded by his treasures and his increasingly wild theories, his profound intellectual curiosity, which could have made him a great patron of the nascent scientific revolution, was tragically overshadowed by his growing mental illness and his inability to engage with the political realities of his time. Rudolph II was dangerous, not because he sought to harm, but because his personal struggles and withdrawal from public life created a vacuum of power and direction that directly contributed to the instability and future devastation of Central Europe. His fascinating but tragic story serves as a stark reminder of how personal failings, when combined with immense power, can have catastrophic consequences for an entire continent. Number 1. Joanna of Castile. Joanna the Mad. Joanna of Castile, known to history as Juana la Loca or Joanna the Mad, was a queen whose life was a tragic spiral of intense love, profound grief, and political manipulation. Born in 1479, the daughter of the formidable Catholic monarchs Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, Joanna was groomed for a life of privilege and political importance. However, her passionate nature and later her alleged mental instability made her a vulnerable pawn in the brutal power games of her era, leaving her a figure whose very existence was considered dangerous by those who sought to control her vast inheritance. From a young age, Joanna was highly intelligent and well-educated, fluent in multiple languages, and trained in the arts and sciences. Her parents, especially Isabella, were meticulous in her upbringing, preparing her for a strategic marriage. In 1496, she was married to Philip the Handsome, the Archduke of Austria, and heir to the vast Habsburg lands in the Low Countries. This was a crucial alliance intended to encircle France and strengthen the Spanish position in Europe. Their marriage was, by all accounts, a passionate one, filled with intense love and equally intense jealousy. Joanna was deeply, almost obsessively, devoted to Philip. He was handsome, charming, and enigmatic, but also notoriously unfaithful. Joanna's reactions to his infidelities were extreme, marked by violent outbursts, public scenes, and fits of despair. She once attacked one of Philip's mistresses, cutting off her hair, an act that shocked the rigid court. Her emotional volatility and fierce possessiveness, while perhaps understandable given her temperament and the infidelity of her husband, were viewed as alarming and indicative of an unstable mind, particularly in an era where female emotion was often pathologized. Tragedy struck her family repeatedly. In quick succession, her elder brother, Juan, her elder sister, Isabella, and then Isabella's young son died, leaving Joanna as the unexpected heir to the crowns of Castile. This sudden shift in her destiny placed an immense burden on her already fragile emotional state. Her mother, Queen Isabella, observed Joanna's increasingly erratic behavior with deep concern, fearing for her daughter's capacity to rule. The most devastating blow came in 1506, when Philip the Handsome suddenly died, likely from typhoid fever, though rumors of poisoning circulated. Joanna, pregnant with their 6th child, was utterly inconsolable. Her grief was so profound it bordered on madness. She refused to let Philip's body be buried immediately, reportedly opening his coffin repeatedly to kiss his feet, even after weeks. She insisted on traveling with his embalmed corpse, embarking on a bizarre, slow procession across Castile, often stopping only at night and refusing to enter convents with female inhabitants. Fearing any woman might take her beloved Philip, this macabre journey, lasting for months, fueled the widespread belief in her insanity and became the most famous testament to her alleged madness. Her father, Ferdinand II, a shrewd and ruthless politician, saw Joanna's distress as an opportunity to seize control of Castile. He publicly declared her incapable of ruling due to her infirmity of spirit, and had her confined. In 1509, Joanna was imprisoned in the royal palace of Tordesillas, a fortress-like convent under the watchful eye of loyal servants and guards. She would remain there for the next 46 years, effectively. Queen only in name. Her confinement was rigorous, enforced by her father, and later by her son Charles V, who inherited the vast Spanish and Habsburg empires. Charles, too, recognized the political danger of allowing his mother any freedom or contact with the outside world. Any sign of improvement in her mental state was often suppressed or downplayed as her continued confinement justified their rule. She was largely isolated, with only limited contact with her children, though her youngest daughter Catherine lived with her for a time. Accounts from those who briefly visited her described her as unkempt, sometimes refusing to bathe or change clothes, exhibiting signs of severe depression, possibly kenturia, or a deep melancholic state. Despite her confinement, Joanna remained a symbolic figure, a potential rallying point for those opposed to her father's or son's rule. There were various attempts throughout the years to free her, notably during the revolt of the Comuneros in 1520 to 1521, when rebels briefly hoped to restore her to power. However, Joanna, whether due to her mental state or simply a desire for peace, refused to cooperate with them. Joanna lived to be 75 years old, dying in 1555. Still confined in Tordesillas, she was the titular Queen of Castile for nearly 5 decades, yet she never truly ruled. Her life remains a subject of historical debate. Was she truly mad, or was her passionate nature and intense grief exploited and exaggerated for political gain by powerful men eager to control her inheritance? Regardless, her story is a powerful one, of a woman whose emotional depth and vulnerability, combined with her immense royal status, made her dangerous to the political ambitions of her father and son, leading to a half-century of tragic isolation. Her story serves as a chilling example of how personal suffering can be leveraged for ultimate power, making her perhaps the most poignantly dangerous Habsburg of them all.